Morning, everybody. This is Dan Zeitlin, Director of the Policy, Data, Performance, and Integrity Division at the Employment Security Department. We're going to get started today with our Executive Assistant, Tamara Johnson, who will take roll call, first of the voting members of the committee, then the non-voting members of the committee, and then the public. Tamara, I turn to you.
Good morning, everyone. So, starting with John Devaney.
Here.
Mike Gempler. Delia Pena.
Here.
Rosella Mosby. Ramon Torres. Michelle Besso. Rosalinda Guillen. Eric Nicholson.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Ignacio Marquez.
Here.
Todd Phillips.
Here.
Uriel Enquez.
Here.
How about Mike Gempler? Rosella Mosby. Ramon Torres. Michelle Besso. Can I ask that you please make sure your phones are muted? I'm hearing other noise besides roll. Rosalinda again. And Dan, you're here, obviously. Alberto.
Good morning. I'm here.
Norma's here. I saw you, and I'm here. Has Craig Carroll joined us?
Yes, I'm here.
And Gustavo Aviles.
I'm here.
And Renee Maldonado.
Here.
Sarah Crosby.
Good morning, here.
Are there any other members that I haven't called? Let me go back really quick and check. Has Mike Gempler joined us? Rosella Mosby. Ramon Torres. Michelle Besso. Or Rosalinda Guillen. Are there any members of the public that would like to let us know that you're on this morning?
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Eilish Villa. I'm an attorney, and I'm in Yakima, and I'm here to represent the public.
Can you please spell your name?
Eilish. Last name Villa, Villa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public that would like to let us know you're here?
Good morning, Dan Fazio at WAFLA.
Dea Angeles from the Consulate of Mexico. Hello.
Hello, good morning.
Scott Dilley, Washington State Dairy Federation.
Carlos Gonzalez, OSPI.
Good morning. This is Sheila Creel, U.S. Department of Labor Wage Hour Division.
Good morning, Tomas Madrigal from the Department of Health, participating as part of the Community Engagement Task Force.
Hi, this is
Christina Rodriguez, Department of Labor and Industries.
Sorry about that. Okay, so Department of Labor and Industries, what was your name?
Yeah, sorry, that's Christina Rodriguez.
Christina. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
the other person?
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if Ellen Lundin has checked in yet from LNI also. Ellen, you still on the line?
Yes, I'm still on the line. I was waiting for a pause in the intros. Alan Lundin with the Department of Labor and Industries.
Okay. Anyone else?
Dave Gifford, Department of Health.
Thank you, Dave.
This is Michelle Besso with Northwest Justice Project.
Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning. Yeah, I don't know if it's somehow I wasn't able to get on. I'm on my cell phone for now. So hope that works.
Hi, this is Giovanni Severino with the Latino Community Fund.
Will you spell your last name for me, Giovanni?
Severino.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to give it one last try for Mike Gempler, Rosella Mosby.
I am here. Thank you.
Oh, yay. Ramon Torres, have you joined us? And Rosalinda again, have you joined us? Okay, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you, Dan.
This is John Devaney. I see Mike Gempler is signed in on the Skype call. I don't know if he's having technical difficulties or if any of the others are as well.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, John. I appreciate that. Again, this is Dan Zeitlin, Director. Oh, go ahead.
This is Gempler. Are you guys hearing me?
Hey, Mike. We can hear you now. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, this is Dan Zeitlin, Director of the Policy Data Performance and Integrity Division at the Employment Security Department. I'm going to run through the agenda for the meeting and then we'll get started. Our first agenda item is to approve the meeting minutes for April 23rd, May 7th, and May 21st. We do have a quorum, but let me ask again, is Rosalinda Guillen on? Is Ramon Torres on? So unless there are objections from the voting members of the committee, I'd like to give them some time to come on to the call in case they have anything to speak to with regard to the minutes, since we do vote on those. So I'm going to switch the agenda up a little bit and we'll turn to approve the minutes after the break unless I hear any objections. Great, no objections. So then we'll start the day with an update from Norma Chavez, our Director of Agricultural and Seasonal Workforce Services, on FLC applications and the activities of her office. We'll then move to continue the discussion, a facilitated discussion led by Sarah Crosby with regards to the H-2A verification and referral process, discussing the improvement ideas that this committee previously discussed. We'll take a break at around 10 a.m. and come back at 10:15. At that point, we'll take attendance and look to approve meeting minutes from the April 23rd, May 7th, and May 21st meetings. We'll then continue the discussion led again by Sarah on H-2A verification and referral processing, the referral process. At 11:15, we'll have our closing discussion and discuss the next agenda. And at 11:25, we'll open it up for public comments. I would ask members of the public to hold for those comments at the end. Everybody will be given an opportunity to speak for up to 2 minutes at that point in the agenda. I'd also ask that participants keep their phones on mute unless they're speaking, and please identify yourself when you speak. With that, Norma, why don't I turn it over to you for an update on FLC applications?
Thank you, Dan. Good morning to all. Thank you for joining us this morning. I know everybody's busy in their respective works. We're starting to give an update on foreign labor certification applications at the committee's request. To date, we have, and when I say to date, that's of this Monday, June 1st, we have 204 contracts commenced with foreign labor certification requests for H-2A workers. The number of workers that have been requested on these contracts to date is 19,749. I know in the past that we've been requested for number of workers in the state of Washington, and we were unable to retrieve that from Homeland Security in the past and have been unsuccessful in other avenues. But we were able to, the last couple of weeks, work with some of the employer and employer associations to try to obtain a number, and it did come with some work, definitely, by our foreign labor certification staff members. The number we have approximately of workers that have arrived in the state of Washington is 13,864, give or take. But I just wanted to follow up with some of the committee members' requests as to the number of workers that we actually think are in Washington state as of June 1st. And that's sort of the update that we wanted to highlight today.
Norma, this is Eric. Sincere gratitude to you and your staff for your hard work in coming up with that 13,000 number. It's much appreciated.
Thanks, Eric. They have, this was labor intensive. I'd have to say about 25% of one of our staff members' time, but we put it to 2 staff members. We also have to thank the employers and employer associations. I know that they are very busy at this time, but we asked as a request right now so that we can have a better idea of how many workers are in the state of Washington. I'm not sure that this would be something we could provide every week, but definitely we have made a good faith effort to do so.
And Norma, Eric, again, a follow-up question. So is it I'm curious in your thinking, is it that there's another 6,000 workers pending arrival, or that of the 19,000 that were petitioned, only 13,000 have been recruited and offered employment? Or any sense of what the delta is in terms of additional workers that will be coming in?
That is our anticipation, that there will be more. As we mentioned in the previous meeting, some contracts have been withdrawn. To date, we've seen 15 contracts withdrawn. We've had a couple of contract impossibilities, and then we had one delayed start from May to mid-August. So I anticipate that we will still get workers, but it will be delayed.
Thank you.
Norma, this is John Devaney. A clarifying question there. Are any of those 13,000 already on their second contract? They may have come earlier for pruning or thinning work and are now moving into cherries, for example. So are any of these workers in the state now already counted as being, multiple jobs?
Without looking at some of the data, I would say I'm not sure, but in looking at some of the for example, the apple crops, I mean, they do other work. So, but I would have to look at the data a little closer to definitely answer that question.
Yeah, I think this is really helpful information, but it is still hard to extrapolate without knowing some of those if we're expecting, as Eric was asking, another 6,000, or if this is that exactly how these two numbers interact with each other.
Definitely. Yeah, I think we were not shocked, but there is a difference if you take a look at, of course, the total number that have been requested to the number that have arrived. There's a difference of 5,885 workers.
Dan?
Thank you for the questions.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. This is Rosalinda. Apologies for arriving late. And I just got a message from Ramon. He will not be able to attend. He has a couple of things happening at the same time, including a dental emergency. So he won't be on this call, unfortunately.
Sorry to hear that, Rosalinda. Thank you for letting us know. This is Dan with ESD. We waited to approve the minutes for you to join us, so we'll move to do that after this conversation. And not sure when you got on, but if you didn't catch what Norma gave in terms of numbers of H-2A workers, she can quickly re-articulate it if that's helpful to see if you have any questions.
Yeah, I just got on, so I would like to hear that information. I'm sorry to have to do this, but again, I apologize.
Thank you, Rosalinda, for joining us. So we talked about the number of contracts commenced in Washington State at 204 as of Monday, June 1st. We have a total number of 19,749 workers requested on those contracts. As in the past, some of you have asked how many workers have actually arrived in Washington. So that is something that our Foreign Labor Certification team has worked on the last couple of weeks. And we have approximately 13,864 workers in the state of Washington. As I said earlier, this has come with some labor to obtain from employers and employer associations. We were not able to obtain this from U.S. Homeland Security. But that's the update that we're giving for Foreign Labor Certification.
Thank you, Norma. I have a question. How accurate do you think those 13,864 numbers are?
Given that they're coming from the associations and the employers, we think it's approximately correct. They have the number of workers that they have at their place of employment. I wouldn't say it's too off, but like I said, we're not saying exactly, but it is approximately. It has come with a lot of work from those employers. As you know, they're in the middle of harvest. And as I stated earlier, it's taken about 25% of one of our employees' time to obtain this information. We were able to have 2 employees work on it, but it is very labor intensive.
Thank you. The other question I had was of the 13,864 that have arrived and it's approximate. I just wanted to say that given and just make a statement, I guess, that given this pandemic, I continue to feel that it's extremely important for the state to know how many workers are actually in the state. And so then, I don't know if this is the time to bring it up, but in relation to the pandemic, then how and who is going to track how many of these workers that have arrived and are here are at what point actually infected or affected by the coronavirus? Is there like a process or a way to monitor that is, set in place that's being monitored or will be monitored? And that doesn't have to be answered now, I guess. I just want to put it out there for whenever it's appropriate in the agenda.
Thank you, Rosalinda.
Norma, this
Okay, are
is
there any other
Ignacio.
questions? Oh, go ahead,
Yeah,
Ignacio.
this is Ignacio with the Department of Ag. Did you say that there's 13,864 workers currently in the state, or there were 13,864? And is it possible that some of the workers already returned home, or?
You're right. The number 13,864 are the workers that we see actively in Washington at this time as of this last Monday.
So the 19,000 that were requested, 19,749, there may be some workers that are already returned home?
That is not my understanding. Those are active workers still on the payrolls with employers.
So that would be a no. These are
They have not returned.
164 workers present as of June 1st.
Yes.
All right. Norma, another question regarding these numbers that you got. So then am I to understand, are we going to be able to, what I would like to see is a reporting of these numbers at every one of our meetings. Have you set up a process where this is being now done consistently?
We have a process when there's applications. We have information that is updated daily, if not weekly, in relation to the applications and the number of workers. The number that you're receiving as to workers in the state has something we just obtained from employers, because at this time we feel that the employers are the best resource. However, I'm not sure that we would be able to obtain this on a weekly basis or a biweekly basis. That's a discussion we would have to have, keeping in mind that right now we have 3 foreign labor certification staff. One is a project employee that will probably not continue year-round. Last year, we only had 1 employee that was there consistently, so this would not have been within their bandwidth last year at all. We're just trying to use the best of our resources right now, that the applications have slowed down. But like I said, during the busy season, especially like in November when applications start, I'm not sure that they would be able to vet employers every week or every other week. It would be very difficult to do.
I guess I would just want to go back to what I said earlier, that given this pandemic, that it is essential that we know how many workers are in the state. I know that we know that as of June 1st now. And I think that Ignacio's question about how many have returned, And if we're going to monitor and take care of the workers that are already here as a committee, I think it's essential we know how many we are responsible for, because I feel responsible as an oversight, part of the labor group that's looking to protect and to ensure worker rights and safety for the H-2A workers coming in, that we know exactly how many workers we're responsible for.
Thank you, Rosalinda. We will definitely take that into consideration.
This is Dan with ESD. I think we would want to hear other committee members' views on the utility and frequency of such data. So obviously we were able to obtain it and are glad we're able to provide this snapshot in time at an important point in time for the committee. We don't have the bandwidth to do this weekly, but if there are other members who have an interest in getting this data with, again, at some point, I think we want to have a discussion about when that might be worthwhile to get again.
Well, this is
Gempler. We've heard Rosalinda's opinion, but if there are others who have opinions on this, that would be helpful.
This is Gempler. Can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead, Mike.
So it's interesting information, and it gives us an idea of the flow of people, but it changes every day, obviously. People are requested, people come, it kind of dribbles in, there's transportation delays, there's consular delays, etc. And it's interesting to see the reality of the number of human beings who are here as opposed to the number of people who are requested on a contract. That's helpful, and it might give us an idea this year that there's some delays, I think, in getting people in. But until there's widespread testing available for asymptomatic people, it's kind of beside the point to think we're going to be tracking who's been, what their health status, or their COVID status. So until that sort of thing is available, I don't think we should be chasing a windmill there, or tilting a windmill or whatever. I screw up metaphors for a living. It's my other career. But we shouldn't try and reach that objective, because it's not really reachable right now because we don't have the widespread testing. But it's great information to kind of know where we are, because before we've just been making guesses, that we knew how many were requested and we kind of guessed when they would come in. So this gives us an idea of the reality, but it's not going to be representative of what I guess you would call typical, because this year is anything but typical. So it just gives us an idea of what's happening this year. And I don't think we should expend a lot of resources trying to do this on a regular basis unless we have some real use for the data. That's my opinion. I mean, it'd be great if you got a bunch of extra people to do this. Great, I don't care. I mean, we could know it, but it just seems like it's a lot of work, and then we aren't really going to use the info.
Thank you, Mike. Do we have other thoughts, comments from voting members on this topic?
So this is Eric.
John Devaney.
Go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, I think this is useful information just for comparing number of job certifications versus actual number of people who tend to be present at any given time under these visas. I think getting the data for an entire season would be very valuable. I'd be open to hearing more about how it might, how knowing this on an ongoing basis could affect our safety measures that we take. But right now, I'm not hearing that we would do anything differently, knowing this data on a weekly basis and hearing that it's fairly staff intensive. I don't see the utility yet in a weekly kind of update of regathering this information.
So Dan, this is Eric. I do think that having this information is important on several levels. I mean, I think Rosalinda already spoke about the importance of public health. I also think on a policy level, it's important for us to know who's in our community. And this has been an area of, I know, consternation. I think one of the first meetings that we had, Dan, who's on the call, pointed out, his concern about what he believed to be the overstatement of number of workers that were actually present. So I think the degree to which, just from a policy point of view, we have a tracking mechanism so we know with specificity who's actually here is important in and of itself. And then you lay over that the importance of knowing that, so as we know how many tests do we need for the different counties. I mean, Lord knows, Yakima, Benton, Franklin County, the top 3 out of the 4 agriculture producing counties in the state. It's a train wreck out here in terms of COVID-19 continued exposures and testing positives. So I think there's also an argument in terms of how do we make sure we're adequately deploying resources to the right areas, to the right communities, prioritizing. I take John's point and Norma's point about the cost and ability to do that, and I'd be open to a conversation about at what time frame and then what is the cost, and perhaps that's something we need to include as well in our recommendations to the legislature to make sure that this is hardwired into our the state's future work and monitoring.
Again, this is Rosalinda. I totally agree with that because we're in the middle of a pandemic and this is a public health issue. And I'm interested in knowing the rate of infection within these 13,864 workers because it's part of the overall statewide health picture. And I know that it's resource intensive, but this is the reason that a lot of enforcement and oversight in agriculture in general hasn't happened because it's resource intensive. And I think we need to look at this differently. So if it's resource intensive and there's additional resources needed, that should be part of our report, that we can't just say that we're not going to do it because it's resource intensive. We have to do as best as we can with what we've got and try to understand how this virus and this pandemic is affecting the season. This is not a normal season. And so for us to not monitor what this season is going to look like under this pandemic is not right. It's not business as usual. So I believe we need to look at this from that perspective.
This is Dan with EST. Do we have other comments from voting members?
Well, this is Michelle.
Go ahead, Michelle.
No, I was going to say that I do appreciate having these numbers, and perhaps we could set another date where we could do another snapshot. I guess in addition to the numbers, though, I share Rosalinda's concern about oversight of the safety and health of the H-2A workers, and I do want to look into how we are going to know about health infections with COVID. And that's, I guess, right now, that's of more concern to me than the absolute numbers of people here, but more that we will find out from either local health districts, Department of Health, how, that we will learn when there are outbreaks I'm not saying if, when there are outbreaks among the H-2A workers, so that we can really have oversight and make sure that they are treated, they are taken care of, and that they're not sent home to Mexico ill. And so I would like to see us discuss that maybe next time on the agenda as to how are we going to have eyes on the ground, or how are we going to set in place monitoring or reporting so that we do know that. I'm very concerned based on looking at the Department of Health checklist for temporary worker housing that's on their website as to how the temporary worker housing is going to be managed for COVID, because it looks to me like it is a checklist. It's a checklist. The housing providers are being asked to say yes or no whether they're going to meet the requirements, and that leaves me concerned about any in-depth analysis of the risk and what's being done to meet those risks and to protect the workers. I didn't even see on this checklist anything about the fact that bunk beds, only one person per bunk bed if it's not group shelter. It's not on the checklist, and it leaves me once again worried, because there is a history of a lack of true oversight of the conditions in temporary worker housing. So I guess, coming around at the long way of saying I would like to look at how we can monitor, but I'm concerned about health. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Do we have other comments from voting members? Yes. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, this was, John Devaney. I was just going to say, I take Rosalinda's point about the need to think in terms of public health, and I guess my concern about the exclusive focus on H-2 visa workers is the lesson to policymakers, if we're solely focused on those numbers, is, oh, don't worry about it. The numbers are 30% less than we thought, based on just the number of labor certifications. When this does not include any domestic seasonal farm workers coming into the state, and it could create a misleading picture of the total workforce, in addition to being labor intensive. So I think that tracking the number of farm workers is important. Knowing exactly where our public health risks are is important, but exclusively focusing on an H-2A count as if that is the only worker population that we have to be concerned about would be a dangerous trend. What you count is what seems to matter, and I worry that if all we're counting is H-2 workers, that's maybe a misallocation of resources.
I totally agree with you, John. I don't think it should just be the H-2A workers. I think it should be the entire farm worker labor population. And the fact that we are focusing on the H-2A workers right now is because we haven't before. And so that is but one snapshot of one component of the Washington state labor force that we see as extremely vulnerable right now, but not, it's not more important than the domestic farm workers that are already in Washington state. The entire picture is important, and we have to have that complete picture. So when I say looking at this group, that's only part of what we have to worry about, but it's a component of it. And I agree with you that we should be looking at the entire labor force, and that's been one of our mandates, right? What is the domestic labor force available for the industry? And the public health and the health status of all farm workers is important to us. So I agree with you, and I think it should be the entire workforce. But right now, these are the numbers that we're discussing, and I think we need to flag, and we were on the course of looking at how to recruit domestic workers, but I think that it's the entire health of all the workers that we're interested in and will continue to focus on.
Hey, Dan, this is Ariel.
Go ahead, Ariel.
Yes, I thought I heard the Mexican representative from the Mexican consulate on the call. My question would be is, how involved is the Mexican consulate in terms of when somebody is identified as being infected with the virus, and then the possibility of being returned to Mexico? Because I heard a concern, I think it was Rosalinda that mentioned that, or Michelle. That would be a question, I guess, open question. Does anybody know, or the Mexican consulate know, that are they involved? Do they get notified when somebody is returned, especially if they're infected?
Hello, it's Zea from the Consulate of Mexico. Can I answer that question?
Please. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, actually for us, it's very difficult to know when a Mexican national is being infected unless they call us or they tell us, because sometimes health services, they don't ask if they where are the people, the person that's infected from. So we don't have a way to know. But if they call us, then we can follow up, and we do have processes available to help people that want to be repatriated to Mexico. So I will put here the number, the emergency services number, so that well, you can pass it around, and if any Mexican has been diagnosed and it's in an emergency situation, which I think it would be, they can call the consulate, and we can follow up with each individual case.
What is that number?
Just a second. I also will put it on the chat, but I'll tell the number here. Just I'm sorry because I don't have it on me, but I can find it right now.
Well, the reality of this is that if somebody tests positive for COVID-19, unless they have a serious reaction requiring medical attention and end up in the hospital, they are going to be considered healthy or able to go back into the workplace after about 2 weeks, if after they isolate and don't show any more symptoms for 3 days. And during that time, it seems highly unlikely that someone in that status would be allowed to go back across the border to Mexico and would want to. So they would be isolating here in the United States. And then after they get through that isolation period, if they want to continue working, then I'm sure the employer would want them to continue working. If they want to go home, then that's another issue. Then they can go home, but they no longer have COVID-19. They're no longer contagious, and they could go. Anyone who is receiving medical attention because they have serious reactions to the COVID-19 virus is going to be in a medical facility here in Washington, or if not in a medical facility in a longer term recuperation, and probably unable to travel. So I just don't see where, unless somebody can correct me. I've been keeping late hours here, so my brain's a little foggy, but I don't see any situations or scenarios in which they would be returning to Mexico.
Yeah, well, in our case, we check every individual situation, and of course, there are restrictions right now for international travel. So we also have to comply with all the requirements, and the only way that someone can travel internationally right now, it's for emergencies. Medical emergencies is one of them, but of course there are how you say, requirements that you keep in mind so that someone can safely go from one place to another. So here is the number. It's 206-618-8202. So any Mexican national can call with their emergency situation, and we can see how to help them and follow up with their cases.
So this is Rosalinda again. It's good to hear, Mike, the processes and everything and the concerns of everybody. Again, I think as a committee, we need a process and a structure to be able to monitor what is happening with H-2A workers as well as domestic workers. And so we have, and this is what we've dealt with before, and that's why this committee was created, is to create these processes and the structure so that we have something in place if this kind of crisis happens again. I believe that, Employment Security Department right now is very much overwhelmed, which is affecting and could affect the way that farm workers, especially H-2A workers, are being taken care of if they become ill. So the monitoring of this workers, as Michelle was saying, concerns us. And the way that this pandemic grows and how fast it spreads, you could liken it to, tracking the infections and what's happening with them. We need a process so that we can, it's kind of like the canary in the mine. When something starts to happen, we need to know broadly what the response from the state agencies and the community is going to have to be to try to contain this pandemic or this virus at this time. We've seen the history of that. It rises and then ebbs and flows. There's all kinds of theories about how this is going to unfold in the future. And I believe that as a committee, we need to have a process and a structure. And that's what I'm asking for. It's like the reporting of what is happening to farm workers in rural areas of Washington State is important. And it's part of our mandate. And we have to figure this out. And if ESD, I know you're really busy, all of the staffing and everybody, but look to see where there might be resources of staffing that you hadn't thought of to help to put these structures and information gathering in place.
Well, first of all, let's deal with the reality. This is Gempler, the reality of what we have. If someone displays symptoms, someone who's working on a farm displays symptoms, that's going to be reported to a county health district. And so we're gathering the data. And so that if the county health districts, for example, Yakima County Health District, if they are keeping track of the names of people and where they work, and I know they're keeping track of whether they're working in agriculture or not, or working on a farm, there could be gathering of data to determine how many of those people are here on a H-2A contract. So as soon as somebody displays symptoms and it gets a positive test, excuse me, I misspoke there. If they display symptoms, they're going to be sent in for a test. If the test comes back positive, it's going to be reported to the county health district. And the county health district will have their name, that they were tested positive, where they worked, that they worked in agriculture. It's just one more step to determine whether they're here on an H-2A visa or not. So you already have a collection mechanism in place. If you stretch it out a little bit there, rather than having a giant testing program for all H-2A workers or all ag workers, which I don't think would be a bad thing, but is certainly not a reality now and doesn't look like it's going to be a reality anytime soon. That's what we got. And what we got isn't bad because people are going to be reporting. We've got a mechanism. So you're going to know how many agricultural workers have tested positive on any given day by surveying health districts. And it's just one more step to see if they're on H-2 visas.
Mike, I agree that there's those first steps, but I do ask then as a committee, I think that next step is not happening currently of gathering that information from the different local health districts.
Right, exactly. No, I wasn't saying that's in place. I'm just saying we don't have to do a giant testing project to get the data because, the data's out there and it just has to be gathered and then characterized by ESD or whoever is gathering it, that somebody that's an ag worker, are they not on an H-2A visa? So how many ag workers have tested positive as of a given date, and if you ask whether they're H-2 visas or not.
So I just have to disagree. I think that in the agricultural industry, as a farm worker, and when what I'm hearing for other farm workers, we need that testing in agricultural, and we need to focus on agricultural workers because it's not happening. The strikes in the packing sheds show that it's not happening. There are more workers sick than have been reported. So the reality of what we're being told by farm workers on the ground in other counties as well is not what you're saying, Mike. And so there is a lack of data that is not being gathered, that is not being recorded, and that is my concern, that we're going to have farm workers ill in this pandemic, and the numbers at the end of this pandemic are going to show that there weren't any sick, when in fact we know that there were. So
Well,
I realize we're late in this process, but what I want is a process and a structure set by this committee so this doesn't happen again. And we need to look at that.
Separate it out. Let's separate it out. There's asymptomatic people who aren't going to know unless they're tested that they're COVID positive. And then there's symptomatic people. Are you telling me that there are a bunch of people working in agriculture who are symptomatic walking around?
There are some.
I don't see it.
There are some, and you don't. This is the thing, is that that's a disagreement that we have. That's why we need a process. I don't want to go back to he said, she said, this is that. I want to, as a committee, find a way to structure a process in data gathering that will prevent this from happening again. And I think that right now, I disagree with some of your analysis and your assessment. Because we're hearing different from workers. And so our role here in this committee is to work with the agencies and to look for setting a process that we know is going to work.
So what you're saying,
that's what I'm putting forth.
You're saying that employers are not reporting symptomatic employees, that they're not sending them for testing, and they're just still out in the workforce symptomatic. That's what you're telling me.
I'm saying that there are some that where that is happening. I'm saying that the workers will keep working as long as they can because they have to. I'm saying that workers right now are beginning to realize that they should not do that because it's infecting a lot more workers. And so this is like an evolving process, and it's not perfect all the way across the industry, and that's to be understood. There's a lot of farmers doing the right thing and a lot of people trying to do the right thing. Our role, I think, is to try to figure out a way that is equitable to gather data and to set a process so we're not back here again next time.
No, I got you, but I think your analysis, two things. There may be people who are working who are symptomatic. And as soon as they're noticed by the employer does not want everybody getting sick. So if they notice somebody who has a few symptoms and obviously has COVID-like symptoms, they're going to tell them to get out of there and take them down to get a test. And secondly, the likelihood that we're going to have a big testing program, which I think would be great. I think would be great to be able to test people all the time. But, if they want that. But that's not going to happen in the next month. I mean, they're barely testing people who are symptomatic.
So I don't think we should be debating our different analysis because inherently you and I are coming from a different perspective. I think that we need to look at this as a committee and what we as a committee are tasked with and what we need to discuss to do to set up processes that are equitable so that we're not back here again in this kind of back and forth because we inherently disagree.
I think we should absolutely be debating it. And that's part of what the committee is for. And furthermore, the majority of those farm workers do have the backup of the federal emergency paid sick leave. They got 2 weeks of being made whole if they test positive and they go into isolation.
Well, we've discussed this a lot, that this isn't working straight across the board, and there are many barriers to all of this. I think that we
got to show
as a
them to me,
committee,
Linda. You want a system, you got to show them to me.
well, this is where we're at right now, right? And so this is what we keep going over and over and over and over again. There are this thing of having to show them and having to prove what is happening on the ground year after year after year has not worked. That's why we've created this committee. So you need to show me.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, this is Dan. This is Dan with the Employment Security Department. I think members have had an opportunity to express their views on this. To take it back, we started with reporting out with the resources that we have, the number of H-2A workers that are in the state. I thank Norma and her team for that work. It's currently resource intensive. I heard a desire to possibly get another snapshot down the road on those figures, and we can look into when we might be able to do that. I heard a suggestion that in the report that the committee put together, they consider possible resources or requirements for ESD to potentially report that information out with some frequency going forward. Again, that information being H-2A workers in the state, which could arguably be in ESD's purview given that we process those applications. I think a lot of these other topics are, yes, within the purview of the committee. We're talking about H-2A workers, but also very Department of Health, local health jurisdiction centric in terms of processes and testing and collecting data related to health. I appreciate everybody's comments. I think we want to move on to the rest of our agenda at this point.
So, Dan, not to beat a dead issue, but just to be clear then, have we coalesced around a position that we do want to have ongoing reporting of the number of H-2A workers in the state? I heard kind of an emerging move towards that amongst us voting committee members. I think one of the open questions was the frequency, but I just want to be clear as to what decision or not we've made right now and what the next step would be.
That was going to be my question.
Correct.
So what are the actionable items coming out of this?
I heard a desire from enough committee members without a vote to get this data with some more frequency. What I would like to do is go back with Norma and her team so we can look at the amount of time and effort it took to collect the information that was provided today, because it was a lot, and come back to the committee with a proposal for frequency of that information. So that would be an action item on our side. And then knowing that information, the committee can then in a report comment on or articulate what they might want to see with the appropriate resources or requirements to do more than ESD is currently able to do. I think I heard Mike.
Yeah, this is Gempler. I support that. So you tell us how often you can do it. That's fine. But I think you ought to add to it a data sweep of all the agricultural county health districts to see how many people working in agriculture have been reported as COVID positive. And so then if possible, determine whether they have H-2A visa status or not. So at least you'd get what was being reported.
Okay, so why don't we, again, we will come back to the committee with what we think would be a good frequency for us to be able to report out the number of workers in the state. Why don't we do the data sweep or talk to the Department of Health about what may be possible within what Mike just suggested, and as an agenda item on the next committee meeting, continue this discussion.
This
Thank
is
you,
Norma.
Dan, and this is Michelle. I appreciate that. We've been trying to get some of the information from health districts, and especially in some of the smaller counties. I think there's some reluctance to share too much about what workplaces there might be COVID positive cases, which is one reason I think this would be important.
This is Norma. I appreciate everybody's, all the committee members' comments and things to take into consideration in relation to providing the foreign labor certification numbers. So thank you. Thank you for your comments.
We have some comments from the public in the Skype conversation section, including a question about being unmuted. Just a reminder, the committee discussion is for members of the committee, and there will be an opportunity for public comments at the end of the agenda. I think given the time that we took with that conversation, I'm going to suggest, or I'm going to move to approval of the meeting minutes, and then I think we should take a break and then return and move into the H2A verification and referral process conversation. So in terms of the meeting minutes, Tamara sent meeting minutes for April 23rd, May 7th, and the much shorter, because now recorded, May 21st meeting. I'd like to give voting members the opportunity to review the April 23rd meeting minutes and entertain any motions to approve the minutes.
This is Michelle Besso. I move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Michelle.
John
Is that
Devaney,
just April 23rd or all three? Is that a first and a second for all three, or just April 23rd?
But the motion was just for the 23rd for now.
Okay. We have a motion to approve the April 23rd minutes and a second. Any objections? Okay, April 23rd minutes are approved. You have in front of you the May 7th minutes. I'll give members an opportunity to review and entertain any motions to approve.
This is Michelle Besso. I move to approve the May 7th minutes.
This is Rosella Mosby. I'll second.
Great. Do we have any objections? Okay. Without any objections, the May 7th meeting minutes are approved. We'll now move to the May 21st meeting minutes, and we will entertain any motion to approve those minutes.
This is John Devaney. I move to approve.
Rosella Mosby. I'll second.
Great. Thank you. Do we have any objections to approving the May 21st meeting minutes? Okay, the May 21st meeting minutes are approved. All right, so thank you everybody again for the robust discussion that we just had. Again, ESD has the following action items. Number one, report back to the committee with a proposal for the frequency with which we can provide the number of H2A workers in the state. Action item number two, we will engage with the Department of Health and local health jurisdictions to see what we might be able to obtain in terms of reporting out to the committee on agricultural worker COVID-19 testing, and perhaps subdivided into H2A workers as well, if possible, and bring that discussion back to the committee at our next meeting. Before we take a break, are there any action items I might have missed from the last discussion?
Dan, this is John Devaney. It's not from this last discussion, but I was reminded in the minutes that at the April 23rd meeting, I'd asked about the returned funds to the federal government for our foreign labor certification grant. I believe that Norman and the staff were looking into that. That's still something I wanted more details on.
Norma, I know you were looking into that. Go ahead.
Yes. Just on an update, we have looked at the past foreign labor certification grant, and I do have some numbers that I don't have available right now, but there are not monies typically returned to the federal government. What happens is they get to be rolled over into the next grant, which was how we were able to hire our project position at this time. And that is the reason we have 3 FLC coordinators at the present time. But I believe the amount that was rolled over was $52,000. I also have been learning that part of the reason for that was that we had a staff member that left to other employment during the months of July, August, and September, which was right at the end of that grant. So it was appropriately funded, but when the employee left, there left that gap of monies. So it was planned for, but you can never plan for when employees leave the agency.
Norma, thank you. That's helpful. Could you put that in writing for us? Because I know that's come up in conversations with DOL staff in DC as we're asking for both a larger grant overall from Congress and a larger share for Washington. And I'd like to be able to address that with some of the congressional staff and the DOL staff.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's a great question. You have sparked in me to delve in more into this next grant and also the current grant we have to make sure that we are spending those funds appropriately. Hence why we still have the 3rd project employee for foreign labor certification in place, so that we can provide, for example, these numbers that we're providing today, and also make sure that we have other reports that are made available, particularly one that you referred to as John, asking for more information regarding apple crops. We were able to use some of our staff to do more analysis. So the reporting has become better just because of that, the grant and the monies we have available for staffing. So thank you. I will provide that in writing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Norma. This is Dan with ESD. Did I miss any other action items from this morning's conversation, or to John's point from previous conversations? Okay, with that, I think it might be best to take a break now so that we have a fuller H-2A verification referral process discussion. So it's currently 9:40. We'll return at 9:55 and turn things over to Sarah Crosby to facilitate that discussion. We'll see everybody in 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are next going to move into our discussion facilitated by Sarah Crosby on the H-2A verification referral process. We'll have that discussion until 11:15, at which point we'll have closing comments and discuss the next agenda. We will then turn to the public, who will at that point have an opportunity to make public comments for up to 2 minutes each. And so with that, why don't I turn things over to Sarah.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning, everybody. This is Sarah Crosby. I'm with Employment Security Department and here to facilitate this next portion of the agenda. So just a little recap on what the committee's done so far working up to this point today. We mapped out the verification and referral processes, and we, in a lot of detail and a couple times, talked through what those processes look like. There were some brainstorm sessions in the past on pain points and obstacles and what bothered you within those processes, and then brainstorming back in, I think it was February, your ideas of how could we make things better within the scope of those verification and referral processes. So what I did is I took all of the notes from the past meetings where you brainstormed improvement ideas, mostly in February, and then again a couple weeks ago there was a couple more ideas added on our whiteboard. Put them in a spreadsheet, so we have this big list, and helped some Employment Security Department staff rate the ideas based on how difficult each idea would be to implement. So we used a scale of 1 to 5. I'll share this document on the screen here in just a minute, and it was emailed out to the committee. But they rated each idea on a scale of 1 to 5 based on how difficult would it be to implement that idea if it was recommended by the committee and we moved forward with it. So a rating of a 1 is considered a low difficulty, which means Employment Security Department could implement it with current resources and could possibly be done or at least significantly started on within 6 months from the time that they start. Medium difficulty is a 3, and that means that ESD could implement the idea, but it might require technology changes or other resources that we need to acquire, and it might take more around 6 to 12 months, so a little bit longer. A 5 or a high difficulty idea means that ESD needs additional resources and or legislature approval or changes, and or would require more than 12 months to implement. So I will share the ideas and the rating and just some brief notes about each rating given to each idea. We're not doing decision making today on these ideas, but this is just another piece of information and another opportunity to provide clarity on what these ideas are. Once we review all of them today, the thought is between this meeting and a future meeting, there would be a survey or an email process where we asked for your votes from committee members on the top couple ideas that the committee should focus on. And we would take those to kind of filter these down and have more in-depth discussions around that filtered down group of the ideas that you would want to consider recommending we move forward with. So kind of slowly narrowing the focus. Any questions before I get started on reviewing the ideas and the ratings? Okay.
Sarah, this is Dan. Do you have a screen that you're sharing?
I will bring it up now.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. I wanted to give the background before I shared my screen so that people weren't too distracted.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Here we go. So you should be seeing my screen now. And this should look like the PDF attachment that was sent out yesterday to committee members. The ideas are grouped from low to high difficulty. So as we read through these, all of these green ones were all rated 1 or low difficulty, and we'll move through them. So the first one, we gave it a short title of Improve Relationships. The description from the past notes was to improve relationships with community-based organizations, unions, etc., improve that community feeling. I want to note here that this was given a 1, and I don't think it was because it's easy to improve relationships, but it's something that ESD could make progress on and work on with current resources within 6 months. So we had in there a 1, and ESD can work on improving our own relationships with a note in these notes fields kind of about our scope sometimes. So we may be unable to control relationships between external groups.
Can I please ask everyone to mute unless you're Sarah Crosby?
Thank you. That helped. Okay. The next one, disclose referrals to employers. So disclose worker info and referrals directly to employers. Also rated 1 or lower in difficulty. So this note, we could run reports and disclose to employers. There's no restriction that prevents us from doing this. If the employer owns a job order, they will receive instant notification. But because in this scenario, ESD enters these, they don't receive those automated notices. The next one, faster connection of workers and employers. Find ways to make the process more lean and expedite the connection of workers and employers. If this approach includes notification of referrals to employers, it would be low difficulty. Other ways of doing this, because this is kind of a broad idea, may vary in difficulty. So depending on the scope and the approach that we took, this could vary. Feel free to jump in if you have questions as I go, or if you want to provide clarification if we were interpreting one of these ideas incorrectly. So the next one, communication to workers in process. Communicating the next step in the process. So this one was about letting workers know, so next in the process, you can expect this to happen, a call from this person or an interview, and along the way being clear about what they can expect next in the process. This would include standardized communication practices in all order holding offices. Review calculations. This is a pretty narrow scope of just reviewing how we calculated domestic worker numbers. Doing that task and describing that would be low difficulty. Again, reviewing calculations, this time reviewing how we calculated domestic jobs and describing to the committee how we estimated UI covered jobs based on UI and BLS methods. Okay, going down to the next page.
I have a question.
Yeah.
UI and BLS, is BLS Bureau of Labor Statistics?
I believe so.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And UI?
Unemployment insurance.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Sarah, one comment I'd make on what we're seeing on this screen, the first screen, just keeping budget in mind, at least at first glance, I would say most of this is staff work. When you see something like a potential IT change needed, for example, on disclosing referrals to employers, that could be not necessarily significant, but a more notable cost outside of simply you have staff in the office, so some number of staff can do this work. When there's an IT change associated with it, with doing something, there's some cost that we would later define if the committee wanted to continue to pursue that or another idea with IT costs.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. the group that assigned these difficulty ratings, this was like a first pass. So there's 30 something ideas in here that were rated. And they wanted to be cautious about how far they were running with an idea that the committee might not even want to put forward. So this was like a first pass at difficulty. Is it low, medium, or high? And some notes about their assumptions or why they rated it that way. As we narrow down the focus and look into some of these a little bit deeper and further, it may adjust a little. We may find other requirements or IT changes that influence that rating a little bit. But I think it at least gives the committee good information. So when you're thinking about what you want to recommend, you have some awareness about how easy or difficult is this.
Hey, Sarah, this is Eric. Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
This is helpful. I think I would suggest there's another filter that we should be looking at, which is impact.
Yes.
Because some of these could be quite easy, but yet minimal impact, and a single difficult one might be highly impactful, and where we as a committee may agree to lean into. So I would suggest we keep the potential impact in mind as well.
Yeah, thank you. We actually discussed that. We talked about assigning it a difficulty and an impact. So we were right in alignment with that. But I think we felt like we weren't the only ones that should be deciding on what the impact is. And we kind of wanted to reflect that back to the committee to help give input on what would the impact of these ideas be. But that's another option to help us narrow down. We could ask committee members to rate impact for each idea rather than just voting on a few.
Maybe that could be homework, Sarah, that like we commit to go back and rank the top 5, top 10, whatever you determine is the appropriate number in terms of most impactful, and we can lay that over difficulty.
Yeah, and then we're trying to help us narrow down or help the committee narrow down the focus so that when it comes to the meeting where you're discussing and decision making on what are the formal recommendations, you have all this information to help you make that decision. So I made a note about that because that's typically how we would do this. We would rate them both on difficulty and impact. But again, we felt that input should be given by the committee on what the impact would be. Good questions. Thank you. All right. So as we move up in difficulty, we're still kind of in the low difficulty range of 1s to 2s. The next idea is field check data. So collecting data on the number of field checks, fact-finding for referred workers not hired, and outcomes of fact-finding. This was given a 1.7. Future, as we are training and providing technical assistance to both employers and workers. Field checks and visits.
Could you this is Rosalinda, could you explain that future?
Yeah, it feels like a word's missing as I was reading that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking this meant this would be in the future. And Norma, if you remember, you can jump in.
Correct. That is something that we're looking at in the future when we hire our compliance staff.
So this may already be in the works.
Yes.
Thank you.
So this is Dan with ESD. So I think, or I know, an important role for this committee is helping to advise the office, to advise Norma as she stands up her office on what you'd like to see the office do, the tools that they use, what they report out. So at least when I look at these couple and perhaps others on this list, these are things that arguably the office should be doing, and I think it's about the committee providing some direction in terms of what exactly they want to see in these areas, what's important to report out, what's important to what kind of education is important to provide when you're doing field checks and field visits and so on and so forth.
Thank you, Dan. This is Sarah again. So this next one is closely related, field checks and visits. Is there an opportunity for education during and after these? Visits and inspections are always opportunities to educate and respond to questions. So the action item here would just be to develop some standard tools and approaches. But I think similar to the previous one, this is something that's probably kind of in the works. Next one, communication and outreach to workers. Communicate the benefit of the verification process to workers. With a note that this is a requirement at the time of referral. So this might be strengthening or improving or creating more consistency around that communication and outreach. Publicity, make the process more public. We put here depends on scope. So this was the extent of the scope and detail given as we were typing these up from previous meetings. So they kind of just put a lower difficulty on this one, but if we were to move forward with this, we would need to really talk through what does that look like and how would we do that.
So my question, this is Rosalinda again. I know that we all put this list together, but are we talking, what process are we talking about?
This, it was
Does anybody remember in the committee?
I believe this is Sarah again, I believe it was the verification process.
Well, this is Michelle. I think it's the whole referral and hiring process. So what can people expect to have happened? When the whole process so workers know what they can expect from a referral and hiring process.
That makes sense to me. Could we like clarify that on the spreadsheet itself at some point?
Yeah. I know my screen just went blank. I will fix
Sarah,
it.
This camera, I'm just letting you know that I'm taking notes as we go.
Oh, okay, you got that. Thank you, Tamara. All right, so make the process more public, and that's a broad scope of the referral and verification processes. That's what I just heard. Next idea, worker training. Invest in training workers to help them learn new skills within agriculture. With a question about the training benefits program, a program that already exists, and is that a program that could help? So again, if we were to pursue this, we would need clarification on what types of training within agriculture. So more work around the scope would be needed to give a more accurate rating of difficulty, but First Pass gave it on the lower end of difficulty because there is a training benefits program that does exist.
Again, this is Rosalinda. So just a note on the budget for that training benefits program. What is it? Can it be increased? Who runs it?
You got that,
Rosalinda, and this is Dan. I think what we'll want to come back to on this one is maybe a little bit of, if committee members think this is an important one to continue pursuing, what programs are available out there, particularly, local workforce areas. They receive money. What are they doing with that money? How can we encourage that? The training benefits program may or may not be the right program to refer to here. It's one in which I believe unemployed, I think Gustavo's on the phone, he may be able to comment more about this. I believe it's one in which those who get unemployment insurance get income support for a longer period of time to enter training programs. But if Gustavo's on, I think he has the strongest familiarity with that program.
Hi everyone, this is Gustavo. Yes, the training benefits just extends unemployment insurance benefits to those who are approved for it, the worker needs to find funds to pay for the training. The funding is just extending up to 26 more weeks of unemployment insurance.
So I think, Rosaletta, to your question,
Yeah.
there are other programs too
Yeah.
to add in here if this is an area that people wanted to focus on.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. This is Sarah again. These are, I think, exactly the kind of notes and comments we were looking for today. So this is great. Keep it coming as we go.
Sarah, this is Ignacio. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So is it safe to assume that anything in level 1 does not require additional resources, additional funding?
Yes. It's safe to assume that. And I think two things come to mind. One, we can be more firm about that if we were to pursue it and do some more research and really confirm that. But that was the idea, was that we could kind of filter out for the committee, here's some things we could do with existing resources. The other thing to keep in mind is we looked at each idea individually. So if I go back up here, we didn't say, could we do all of these level 1 things with no additional resources all at the same time? We didn't have that discussion. It was just really looking at one idea at a time. So depending on how many recommendations are put forward and how they fall, something that we thought could be done with no resources in less than 6 months may take a little bit longer because we didn't look at it from how it would look to implement a group of things. But the idea was, yeah, to highlight ones as things we could implement with existing resources.
Sarah, this is Norma. Just as a caveat to all is that there is one exception, and that is where we involve IT. Most of our meetings were amongst EC, the ASWS, and some participation with LMEA. However, given the UI crisis that we have right now, with IT really trying to put all their efforts into our website and claims and such, we were not able to vet them at this time. So I just want to clarify that portion of it.
Yeah, thank you.
This is John Devaney. Sarah, this is John Devaney. I was just going to say that I think that it's important to note where these things can be done within existing resources, but for evaluating them, I'm assuming that resources are finite to some extent, especially staff time resources. Even if it's budgeted, you can't commit people to working 120 hours a week, you know. So it would be helpful to have some kind of estimate of how much of existing resources would be necessary to implement, so that we can balance the benefits that, you know, that we would get from doing this with the potential commitment of resources, whether existing or new, to get a real cost-benefit analysis, sort of what Eric was talking about earlier.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Could somebody just, I'm asking a ignorant question here. What does EC stand for? Employment what?
Employment Connections. And it's a division within our agency that all of the work source offices are part of.
So Rosalinda, as that intersects with this work, as we talked about when we talked yesterday, at our last meeting about the Wagner-Pizer budget, that was really the budget for this division within the Employment Security Department. So in this world, you can think of this is the division that is processing the job orders, doing recruiting. This is the division that is part of a work source system that manages job centers around the state. And this is the division that has migrant seasonal farm work outreach occurring. And in general, they are charged with employment and reemployment services for the state. again, as a partnership in a larger system that involves local workforce areas. So there's a local workforce area centered in Yakima, for example, for which we're a partner. This division, Employment Connections, is a partner, but for which there are other service providers and funding that goes into employment programs.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. This is Sarah again. Next one on the list is employer resources. And this idea was providing a packet for employers on best practices for the hiring process. It would include sample or template forms for interviews and applications. So this was rated as a 2.7. So our EC division and this committee could cooperatively develop a best practices hiring packet. Next one on here, labor shortage study / displacing workers, ? Determine whether domestic workers are really being displaced. So this is a medium difficulty. The study would need to be designed and identifying the data needed. Labor shortage study, answering the question, is there actually a labor shortage? Again, need to design the study and identify the data needed.
Sarah, this is Dan. Gustavo, if you're available and willing, can you maybe speak a little bit more to, so that we can capture and the members can understand when they're thinking about prioritizing a little bit more into this in terms of what would entail, what the resources requirements might be, how long these type of things take. I think it'd be important for the committee as they're considering doing either or both of these, which is important work, but really understanding what that would entail for LMEA. And LMEA is our labor market economic analysis division, for which Gustavo's team that does the agriculture survey and would do this kind of study is housed. So, Gustavo?
Yes, thank you, Dan. In order for us to do a labor shortage study, first we would need to agree with the committee what labor shortage means to you. And we may have our economic definition, or there may be some other definitions out there. And so that would be the first step. The second step would be designing how we go about identifying whether that exists or not, and how that is affecting the local workforce. Our estimate is that all that work that goes into any study requires at least one economic analyst full-time. Usually we start by doing some literature review in which we try to see what other researchers have done in this regard. And based on that, then we would come up with our data needs and then what the study would entail. And usually when it comes to data needs, we would have to identify whether we already have that data, either through our administrative systems, or if we do need to create a new way of collecting additional data. Sometimes the most likely is conducting a survey, but there are other ways that we could probably collect data or have access to additional data that would allow us to conduct the analysis. So our estimate is that it would imply one full-time dedicated economic analyst for at least, or at most, 12 months. That's why we put it in 3. We already have some work on that, but it's not fully implemented, and it's just partial. Does that help, Dan? Or
yeah, that's very helpful, Gustavo, and I want to flag it here and thank Tamara for capturing it My second, what John was saying before, there are costs to everything. Resources are finite, and the committee should understand costs for each of these as we get further down the list. And here was the first one that jumped out at me. We're probably getting to areas where we don't have the resources, so it's less about are you trading one thing for the other with the resources you have, and more of you have to hire a person or people to do this work that I'm going to imagine, Gustavo, you don't yet have in your unit. So I wanted to flag that, and I think if we capture some of that here, that might be helpful for members as they take this work back home.
Dan, this is Eric. Can I make a comment?
Please.
I think there's another important data source that, as we look at this, to figure out how to better capture, and we've had conversations about this, which is worker experience. I've been struck at how easy it is to find workers in the Yakima Valley and the Columbian Basin who have repeated experiences of going to apply for jobs where they know there's guest workers because the AWR is the prevailing wage rather than the state's minimum wage, and are denied employment. And so I think somehow being able to capture those experiences in both 11 and 12 would be important, which it seems like outside the scope of a traditional shortage survey, but I think there's really important information we need to kind of capture there.
This is Gempler. Eric, if you know those situations, are they reported to L&I?
They're not. The problem we've got multiple problems on that front, Mike. One, there's no disclosure of the 50% rule, and so there's ambiguity in terms of whether or not the workers, when they're applying, they're within that 50% window. The second, there's real skepticism amongst many workers about what, if anything, will happen if they were to report. So I think those are some areas that, as we move forward, I'm very interested in closing the loop. As we did in the COVID-19 rules, of proactively ensuring that workers know how to file complaints, and similarly, how do we better disclose the obligations of employers to hire domestic workers if within the 50% window, and then where to go to file complaints if they are denied employment.
Well, I have a feeling that if somebody called Norma Chavez or somebody in her office, that she wouldn't let them be discriminated against for complaining and could investigate.
I would tend to agree, Mike. As awesome as Norma is, I fear her name and reputation is not yet well known amongst the farm worker community, so we've got some work to do.
But I also think, this is Rosalinda, I don't think that that's the point, is to have individual workers call the director of this committee in this department. The point is to try to build a structure and to ensure that the Department of Labor and Industries complaint process is actually working, and that the workers have the trust in the L&I to actually do something when they complain. I think that there is no trust that the Department of Labor and Industries is actually going to act on a worker's complaint. Worse, that complaint is even going to go anywhere.
Well, we're not even talking about L&I. I made a mistake in stating that. I mean, they should be calling ESD, and that's one of the functions we had discussed, was a complaint line managed by this office.
It's not working. What I'm saying is that the complaint process pretty much in all of the state agencies is not working to the level that workers trust it. So that is not but the other thing I was going to say, and then that's the reality out there, but the other thing I was going to say is that in these studies, is there a way to determine the economic impact on the state of Washington of this payroll, of a H-2A payroll leaving the state? Like, can we monitor the dollars that are being paid out in these large H-2A contracts?
Thank you, Tamara, or thank you all for your comments, and thank you, Tamara, for taking notes today. So I think that's all good information to wrap into this.
But is that possible, Gustavo, to track that payroll? What would that take?
I would say that would bump to a 5. And I believe it would be a different type of study. The way I understand, based on your comments, I see three types of studies. One is the labor shortage, which just determines whether the market is not in equilibrium, and meaning there are less workers than there are jobs out there. That's one thing, that type of study that we're referring to labor shortages. The second one that I heard, it's a program evaluation, what we call program evaluation. It's evaluating whether our processes and programs are working the way they are supposed to be. And that would entail also a study that would rise to a 5. And usually when we do the program evaluations, it takes us up to 3 years. I'm not saying that this would take that long, but and it would entail more than one analyst. Usually when we do program evaluations, it works between 2 and 3 analysts, and it takes longer period of time. And the third type is your question, Rosalinda, is about what is the economic impact of a program or a policy. In this case, it would be the H-2A program. What is the economic impact on Washington? And we would try to analyze your question. How much money is going out? Is that cost effective? And there are other things that come to mind. Just based on your comments, again, we would need to look into it more. But the way I see it, there would be three studies that are probably closely related, but they would need to be addressed separately.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Thanks, Gustavo. This is Norma. And just going back to what Mike said earlier, I think he was referring to, Norma Chavez as in the unit itself. And I do see that as part of the role of the compliance team is to take a look at concerns or complaints where domestic workers are not getting hired with growers. I think there is an extensive amount of education that's going to be needed with some employers, and also technical assistance, but also make them aware that this is very much a requirement. And so I think that's what he was referencing. But thank you.
This is John Devaney. I just wanted to make one clarification on an aspect of something that Eric said around this question. I heard him say that it was a belief that it may be an H-2A employer who was denying employment to a domestic worker just because of the wage rate being offered that led to a presumption that they were an H-2A employer. In many cases, because of the 50% rule, employers who are not using H-2A workers feel the need to offer the AWR in their region, because otherwise their domestic employees will go to an H-2 employer in the area. And so they essentially feel they have to increase their wages from whatever they might normally have been offering up to the AWR. So just offering the AWR is not evidence that that employer is definitely an H-2A employer, and they might have successfully kept their domestic workforce by offering that wage increase. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear.
Sarah, thank you all for your comments and for your good questions today. Much appreciated. And it might make sense to modify this list a little bit and maybe break some of these studies up to align with how we've discussed. So if updates are made, we'll be sure to share, not if, when, when updates are made, we'll be sure to share that out. So moving along, customer experience study, understand the process and the customer experience. This depends on scope, how deep we go, the level of sophistication. So it's another one of those, it depends, but kind of in the middle of the road right now, rated at a 3. Workers self-report referral outcome. So asking workers to self-report. Create a system where workers self-report outcomes of referrals, increase worker accountability. Workers and staff would need to be trained on how to do this. ESD would need more uniformity in recording placements in the system. So this is a medium difficulty, all of these. Employer training for employers on domestic worker interviewing, questions to ask and not to ask. We could cooperatively develop best practices training for employers.
Can I go back to 15 just really quick to just flag right now for further discussion, the increased worker accountability? I'm trying to remember what that was about. So if you could just flag that.
Yeah, we can do that. From what I remember, it was about worker accountability in reporting the outcomes of referrals, but we can definitely flag that. Okay, last one on this page, a reporting system, a public worker reporting system. Put this kind of in the middle. It depends. We needed more clarity. Couldn't remember exactly what this was about, so this one would also depend on the scope. And if anyone does remember, you're welcome to provide that. Okay, so the next one is a connection to UI, improved connection between UI, which is unemployment insurance processes, and recruitment process. The discussion here was it's between medium to high difficulty and connecting processes between unemployment and recruitment. The discussion was about making that apply equally across the board and used for all claimants or customers rather than narrow scope or case specific connection. Disclose DOL reports to ESD. So H2A employers would disclose their DOL reports to ESD. This would require employer and or Department of Labor cooperation. So because it starts to fall into that, requires things outside of ESD, it starts to grow in difficulty.
So can I just clarify, I assume this is disclose the recruitment reports, reports of what we call the recruitment reports, the reports of people who have applied for the jobs, and then whether or not they were hired.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Sarah, this is Ignacio.
Yeah.
Just on number 34, when you said scope, do you mean that it depends on whether we're trying to get information about ag jobs to all UI claimants, or just UI claimants that have a history of working in ag?
I don't remember discussion about either of those scenarios specifically. Norma, are you able to jump in?
Yeah, I don't recall that either. I think the big thing is if we provide it for one audience, we have to provide it for all claimants. We can't just, stick to ag.
Craig's on the phone. This is Dan with ESD, but I think he may have spoken about our history with this before and might be able to provide some clarity if he's on the phone, or Alberto.
All right. I'll jump in there if Craig might have connection issues. I know I had them for a little bit. What I can say is I know historically, years ago now, we pulled a report where we were able to isolate individuals working in agriculture and then follow up with them when they were claiming unemployment insurance benefits and connect them with employment opportunities. And so that was a historical practice. It's one that just discontinued over time. We could revisit something like that. I think the issue when we look at implementing any process is that we're careful about not isolating a practice to a specific population, and that we apply that practice across all populations and all industries. And so I think that's where we would have to create another process and ensure that we're doing so in an appropriate manner.
Thank you for the clarification, Alberto.
I had a question on 17. Requires employer or Department of Labor cooperation. Does that mean that there is no legal reason for it not to happen? Is the disclosure of the Department of Labor reports?
So I can help a little bit with that question, Rosalinda. This is Alberto. And the portion around DOL cooperation was placed there because there is a federal rule that requires employers to maintain records of all the individuals that applied for H-2A job opportunities and the outcomes of those inquiries. And in the rules, Department of Labor has the authority to request those records at any time. But that authority is not necessarily extended to ESD. We could request that information, but we haven't been given the authority to specifically require an employer to give us that information. The Department of Labor certainly could delegate that authority to us, but that has not happened at this time.
All right, thank you.
Okay, this is Sarah again, so we'll keep going. Thank you again for the questions and comments along the way. I think this is exactly what we were looking for out of this today. So we're moving along to 26, clarify roles. You'll note that the numbers on that left-hand side are not in numerical order. So we originally typed these up just in the order that we found them in the documentation. They were all numbered, but when we did a resort to group them together by difficulty, those numbers got mixed up. So they're helpful for reference, but that's why they're not in numerical order. So clarify roles. Set clear guidelines around the roles of the agent, contractor, and farmer. Interviews would be with the farmer. And we put this as a higher difficulty and noted that it is outside of ESD's scope.
Why is it outside? Could you explain that?
So I think partially, well, I'll ask Norma or Alberto to jump in.
Because this is around recruitment, right?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I guess the initial perspective I can provide is it would be very difficult for us to tell an employer who they delegate authority to and how those interviews are conducted. And so I think that's, at least from my perspective, why I placed that to be very difficult.
Outside of scope of our direct control? Is that?
And you're talking about H-2A or domestic worker recruitment here? Do we remember what we were talking about when we said clarifying roles?
Rosalinda, this is Michelle. I believe I remember this conversation. We were talking about the difficulty that some workers have had where they don't know who the actual employer is, or they have multiple interviews, like an interview with a contractor, and then maybe an interview, separate interview with the actual grower. And so we were talking about clarity as to who is the actual grower that's the job will be with, and having the interview directly with that employer or grower.
I remember. Because workers get the runaround, and sometimes they get sent one place and then they go to another place, and in the end they end up not getting hired. So can we flag this for further discussion, to go back to it and try to understand? Because again, we're talking about ensuring that domestic workers have every opportunity to be able to apply for the jobs before H-2A workers are recruited. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to ensure that there isn't that kind of confusion when it comes to recruitment of domestic workers?
Yeah, thank you, Rosalinda. This is Dan with ESD. So, yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I think for this exercise, it's identifying if this is somewhere where we want to focus and going that level deeper. I haven't gone that level deeper, but it sounds like it would be a matter of what kind of rulemaking or legislating or what would have to occur to enable ESD to do that. So I think for the purpose of this exercise, it's making sure we understand what it is.
Yes.
And my guess on this is that it would require something in that space, rulemaking or legislating to make it happen. And so if it's a matter of, if it's something that the committee wants to prioritize, we want to go further down that road of seeing what exactly it is that would need to happen to make this work. And then ultimately the committee would decide if that's something worth pursuing.
This is Norma. With that said, as Alberto said, and to Rosalinda's point is, yeah, it is a difficult thing to clarify whose role is it altogether, and where those interviews fall into place and with whom. So that I think, yeah, it's definitely something that we need to clarify more as to the process.
Okay, thank you. This is Sarah again, so we'll keep moving through. The next one is able and available. Explore able and available wording compared to the requirement to commit to completing to the end of contract. Is there a way to capture data regarding those disqualified due to this barrier of commitment to completing the contract? Provide additional clarification about what they can or cannot compel a farm worker to commit to. So this is moving into the higher difficulty. It's rated as a 4. It does require a rule change. A DOL rule change requires excessive manual time and effort. Clarification could be provided that might lower the difficulty. So depending on the approach, there might be some lower difficulty approaches. Next one, work source and employer processes. Create an intersection between work source processes and employer processes. This one was rated as a 4, with just a note that it would need more clarification about that, what that intersection would look like and how that would work.
And I think this is Dan from ESD. I believe was this conversation about how we've been focused on the ESD, the work source processes, which is just a component of, or one thing that employers do to recruit workers. And how do we meld those more together, I believe. I don't know if committee members have comments on this. I think it was part of as a result of the meeting we had in which Craig and others kind of walk through our processes, but we also had Delia and others talk about what employers do, even beyond what WorkSource, which ultimately makes up a small percentage of their recruitment efforts, what they do beyond that.
Well, this is Rosalinda. I know that we've talked about, and I don't know if this is we're going to get to that in another section, but in regards to WorkSource, we've talked about workers coming in to find jobs in agriculture, and that intersection of the barrier that's created by these jobs being online in the internet. And I know that if we're going to talk about intersection between WorkSource processes and employer processes, and there's also barriers, we believe, to worker process, like how WorkSource interacts with workers also, to try to find those jobs or get access to local ag jobs. And I don't know, I'm trying to remember where this came from, but I know that we had a long conversation about that. And I know that you've made some improvements, but there's still like, how do we increase the recruitment of domestic workers through WorkSource so that there's a lower number of H-2A workers coming in?
But also, Linda, what I remember is that we talked about there was kind of two separate processes. There's the WorkSource process, and then what I would say is what really happens in the field. And then what I think this is trying to talk about is how do we somehow bring those two processes together? Because because we know that what happens in the field is how recruitment happens, how people get jobs, how they move from one job to another is very different, and oftentimes has nothing to do with the whole WorkSource process program. So somehow trying to bring all of that into alignment. So to your point, I think this came out when Ramon talked about, what was it, tulip workers that had been laid off, and then somehow ensuring that they were able to get to secure employment as a result of their layoff early in the year.
Well, that was part of it, but the other part is that the H-2A workers that Washington Bulb Company had continued working.
Right.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think that needs to be flagged to clarify. I just want to make sure that intersection of workers looking for jobs is equitable to WorkSource services to employers, that there's an equitable balance there. That's where I'm coming from.
Okay, this is Sarah again. Thank you. So the last one on this page is employer communication to workers. Clearly communicate, so this would be the employers to clearly communicate to the worker on the spot whether they are qualified or hired, on the spot meaning during the interview or application. And I think this was coming out of a discussion where there was stories about workers not being clear, again, about the process and what to expect next, or whether they were in fact qualified or hired or just moving to the next step in the process. For ESD to implement this, higher difficulty, it may require rules changes, and it does require the cooperation of employers. Okay, next one, workers and contracts. Support hiring workers even if they don't commit to finishing the entire contract. We put this as a higher difficulty, and again, a note that it's outside of ESD's scope, which is part of why it's rated as a high difficulty. Next one, review calculations. So review how we calculated foreign worker numbers. We don't have data sources to estimate the number of foreign workers, number of visas granted and used. So that would make this a higher difficulty.
This is Dan with ESP. Does that seems like that just ties in the conversation that we just had to start the meeting? That is, in a resource-intensive way, we can survey employers. What might the committee recommend in terms of resources or requirements to report that information? If I'm connecting those two conversations right.
Yep. Agreed. We need to figure that out.
Yeah. And the next one relates closely to it, but separating them out because it's two separate efforts, but reviewing how we calculate jobs held by foreign workers. So to estimate the number of jobs held by foreign workers per day, week, or at least per month requires a new system that would capture detailed information of the H-2A job orders and periodic reporting from employers and workers. Next one is recruitment by phone. ESD calls workers personally to recruit with direct and personal outreach, getting phone numbers through data sharing agreements with the union. So this is part of the recruitment, implementing this process where there's this direct outreach by phone. This would require more staff to be dedicated to that function, requires money or budget. It could be implemented, though, on a smaller scale with a lower difficulty or a medium effort. It would require a memo of understanding, that's what MOU is, memo of understanding, or data sharing agreement with unions. Outside work source WA, make the process as effective as possible if workers prefer going outside of the work source WA process. Again, high difficulty. This requires working with DOL to approve this practice if the intention is to unsuppress H-2A employer information on WorkSource WA in alignment with seasonaljobs.gov.
This is Michelle. Hi. Could you explain why that would be needed to implement for? What are you envisioning about making the process effective that would require DOL's approval?
I'm pausing to let Norma or someone on the team to clarify that.
This is Alberto, and I'll note again we've streamlined the language, and so as I read this again, I think one of the thoughts we had is as we think about making this process more effective outside of WorkSource WA. As we know, with WorkSource WA, we don't announce the specific name of an employer when we put a job announcement out there, but yet we do know that seasonaljobs.gov does do that, which is a federal website that promotes, at a minimum, I believe, H-2A job orders. And so our thought was if WorkSource WA is to align with that, we'd need to work with DOL to ensure we have permission to, because the current rules prevent us from doing that. And by specifically being able on WorkSource WA to communicate the name of an employer and more specific information associated with the employer contact, for example, on our website, that would increase the linkage between employers and workers directly. We could still easily put that option to work with us for those that would like to. But again, it would require cooperation from the Department of Labor. And I know we've requested feedback on that in the past from the Department of Labor and have not gotten any response from DOL or support for our position.
And Alberto, could you, I'm sorry, because I know I should remember this from your presentation, but is that over the entire recruitment period that you have to suppress the employer name, or is that only when it's in the first stage?
It's a requirement under the agricultural clearance system rules. So, and it does not specify we only do it during a certain period of time. So we do it throughout the whole recruitment period.
Alberto, is this just for agriculture?
It is only for job orders that work within what we call the agricultural recruitment system. And those are agricultural job orders for which we recruit workers outside of a local area. Given H-2A requires that, all H-2A job orders fall within the agricultural recruitment system and the requirements underneath that, one of them being to suppress employer information.
So agricultural industry is the only industry where this is happening?
Yes, and specifically for those that choose to go through the agricultural recruitment system, and with the exception of H-2A, to participate in H-2A, you have to participate in the agricultural clearance system.
So as part of this, I don't know if we asked this question before, I'm wondering about the percentage of the agricultural employers in the state of Washington that choose to go through this system.
I can tell you the numbers are really low. I think as it stands right now, we only have one non-H-2A employer that has chosen to use the agricultural recruitment system this year. Overall, it tends to be dominated by H-2A employers.
Okay, so technically the vast amount of agricultural employers in the state of Washington then don't require this approval, Department of Labor approval, only H-2A.
Yeah, it's primarily H-2A, and part of it is to be part of the agricultural recruitment system and to request help from employment services from WorkSource to recruit outside a local area. The Department of Labor requires an employer to not only guarantee announcement of wage rates, but also to provide housing. And so not all of our employers that request recruitment support always have housing available. And so that's one of the reasons we've heard the agricultural recruitment system is not as an attractive option for employers. And obviously housing is required for H-2A.
Right.
This is Norma. In addition to what Alberto has explained, keeping in mind that, if we do go to that and get authorization through USDOL, that would affect the referrals because, as Alberto expressed, there would be a direct linkage with agricultural workers and the job itself, which we would not be able to get placements on. So I want the committee members to keep that in mind, which would be a requirement for field checks at this time.
But what stage in the process do you disclose the name of the employer? In other words, so there's nothing on the website, it just says there's a job. So then the worker has to apply for a job without knowing the employer, right? And then when do they find out who the employer is?
They find out, this is Alberto again, they find out after we've screened their application. So they apply for the position, we screen that application, and then once we review to determine the information they've provided us indicates they meet minimum requirements, we'll provide employer information so that they can now directly work with the employer.
Okay.
Hi, Michelle. This is Renee. I would just add that that part of the referral process also includes educating the workers on their rights under the H-2A program, and that would be also something that you guys need to contemplate if you decide to unsuppress employer's information.
So a big part of this, though, then is there still is. I assume we have. I think we do. We have somewhere else on this chart how to try to make it work under this existing system more effectively. Correct, in terms of making sure that the screening is happening promptly, and right. That's a different.
Yeah, that's one of the lower level,
Okay.
lower difficulty items at the beginning.
Thanks.
Okay, this is Sarah again. Thank you. Thank you all. Last one on this page is language access. Translate the side-by-side document into Triqui and other dialects and languages. This is rated high difficulty because there is a cost to translating into different languages, and languages selected for translations are based on census numbers. H-2A workers would not be reflected in those numbers, so the intended audience of the side-by-side is for domestic workers.
And that would make it more expensive, more costly?
This is Norma.
Yeah.
At the present time, we are providing the side-by-side in Spanish, and that's by internal means. But any more languages, we would definitely have to look at the cost of doing those side-by-sides for the future. We can tell you just by translating some of the minutes for this committee, it has been pretty costly just with the minutes. If we start translating other documents, that is a discussion that we need to have as an agency as a whole with the limited English proficient information we're already providing, for example, with UI. I know we're developing the LEP committee again to have discussions as it affects ESD as a whole.
So this is Rosalinda, and I just want to comment that, I just want to make a comment as part of this committee that when we realize that the majority of the workforce in agriculture is Spanish speaking, it just seems to me that it would just be natural to ensure that this department had enough funding to provide this kind of translation. And I'm not faulting you or anybody. This is the way the structure was created within Employment Security Department and other agencies in the state of Washington, that when dealing with agricultural workers, it just seems like it's a no-brainer that the majority, if not 99% of the workforce in agriculture is Latino, and out of that, a higher percentage is Spanish-speaking only, that the states would somehow just be a normal course of budgeting that translation and interpreting is just part of everything that you do, given that this is what the workforce is. So I just wanted to comment that, and as we move forward with this committee, this budgeting issue is going to be important, and where the money is being spent when it comes to farm workers. Where's the focus?
This is Eric. Just to build on that, I think another challenge we have is literacy, and that my experience has been there are workers whose primary language may not be Spanish, but Triqui or Quiche or an indigenous language, who are fluent in that language but not literate in that language. And so I think, if our goal is understanding, which I would suggest that be, that we need to be creative in how we impart that information. And traditionally it's been, written disclosures, which, the posters right now I find visually overwhelming. So I just think we need to be creative as we think about this, is how do we make sure workers have access to the information that they need in a way that they can really understand.
Well, and I think it goes beyond being creative. It's a recognition that there's been a very strong bias here of the state agencies focusing on the English-speaking employers mostly, and not on the workforce that is very different. And I just want to put that out there, that we need to really look at the perspective of how we're going to monitor and put language and processes for the workforce in agriculture.
Yeah, so we may need to add something with a different scope that because I hear what you're saying, and I don't want this to come across as downplaying the importance of translating to other languages. The scope of this particular item is translating the side-by-side document, which I believe is a recruitment document used with the intended audience of domestic workers, and it is currently translated into Spanish. So the scope of this was to translate it into some of those other dialects in addition to Spanish. And the scope was pretty narrowed to that side-by-side document. So we may need to work through this one a little bit, or add an idea with a different scope of what gets translated and into what languages.
I agree.
How it's written is a very narrow scope into translating this one type of document into other dialects. Good discussion. Thank you. Okay, next one. Referral tracking and follow-up. Create more consistent tracking methods for tracking referrals. This is for ESD, tracking referrals both through the system and outside of WorkSource WA. Track all referrals and their outcome. Short registration, which is a different and easier and shorter way of registering through WorkSource WA, would help. This would require staff to follow up on every referral to determine the outcome. It requires staff and budget resources to do that kind of follow-up on every one, or it would require staff and budget to require employers to report to ESD referral outcomes. So two different ways it could be approached, either following up with people who were referred or with employers, but either way requires resources. Smartphone app. Create a smartphone app for workers to scan in when applying at a site. This is rated high difficulty. It would require technology and IT resources and funding. And a note, it may be a barrier if workers are required to download this app and use a new or additional type of technology. Provide employer identity. Provide employer identity as we do with other employers and like we see on seasonal.jobs.dol.gov. I think we had a little bit of discussion about this already. This requires working with DOL to approve this practice if the intention is to unsuppress H-2A employer information on WorkSource WA in alignment with the Seasonal Jobs website. Requires DOL regulations to be modified, or maybe a waiver. Collect more data. Number of applicants, including outside ESD. Identify number of workers hired outside of ESD process. How many use the referral path outside of creating WorkSource WA account. So collecting data on these things would require collecting and compiling information from employers. Family housing. Offer more family housing. Rated as high difficulty as it's outside of ESD's scope of direct control.
Sarah, this is Eric. Can we just go back to 13 I'm sorry, I guess 13 for a second.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious why that's a 5 and I would suggest it's not just employers, but groups such as those of us who are on the advocate side of this call also would have access to the information. Why would that be difficult in terms of putting out a call for people to share data?
Others can add to this, but from what I remember as we were rating these, if it required something outside of our direct control that ESD could implement, if it required others to take an action, it was just rated as a higher difficulty. Not so much that it would be difficult for us to request that, but it's more difficult just because we are having to rely on others to provide that. But Norma, Alberto, Craig, if any of you have additional insight into that, you're welcome to share.
This is Norma. I think part of it is that it would require the regulation to change, and that's something that's beyond our scope, that they would have to voluntarily change that regulation or provide a waiver specifically to Washington State.
Thank you. I just
Dan, with ESD, I think we should go. There are a couple of these in here where I think we should go back for the committee and note that when that's what makes it difficult. So that in something like this, if we're going, we could voluntarily ask for stuff, but if you're going to require it, it sounds like there probably have to be some legislation to do that. So we should, when we talk about difficulty in our notes and assumptions, delineate between difficult because a body other than ESD or the executive branch needs to do something, and we need action from, say, the legislature or the U.S. Department of Labor versus our technical or staffing ability to do something.
Yeah, we can do that. Dan, this is Sarah. I just noticed too that it's 11:17. So we have one more on this page and then 4 on the next. Do you want me to keep going with these, or do you want to shift to the next item on the agenda?
So committee members, I think if we finish this, we're likely to go long. So just a quick pulse check on voting members. Would you like to finish this out and go long to leave time for public comments, or finish the remaining items at our next meeting?
It's Rosalinda. I'd like to finish at the next meeting.
Yeah, I've got a hard stop at 11:30, Dan.
Okay, so why don't we pause for today. We'll update this with additional information we collected today, and we will complete this at our next meeting. And then once that's complete, we'll move to getting a survey out and getting input on what members would like to prioritize. So thank you, Sarah. Greatly appreciate you facilitating that discussion. So at our next advisory committee meeting, which we have tentatively scheduled for 8:30 to 11:30 in the morning on Thursday, June 18th, we will, as an agenda item, return to the discussion we had this morning about capturing the number of H2A workers in the state and health testing of those workers. We will complete going through this document that Sarah worked through with us today. And then we are going to return to our discussion on Wagner-Peiser, getting to the various questions that we put on the whiteboard when we met at our last meeting. Before we turn to public comments, are there any thoughts or comments from the committee members about the agenda for the next meeting or otherwise?
This is Michelle. I would like to, I think I said this at the end of the last meeting, but I would like to again ask that at the next meeting we set aside at least some time to look at the status of the implementation of the housing protections for migrant and H2A workers, how that is working with the agencies. I do think that the oversight function of our committee requires that we keep an eye on what's happening with COVID safety in the housing. Thank you.
This is Rosalinda. I agree. I second that.
And Michelle, are you speaking to our agency and other agencies' abilities to coordinate and go inspect
Correct.
housing?
Correct. Thank you.
Do we have other members of the committee who would like to return to that discussion at our next meeting on June 18th? Or I should say have that discussion.
This is Eric. I would appreciate getting an update.
We have Eric, Rosalinda, Michelle. Okay, we will discuss that. And again, we will circle back with the committee with the agenda for the next meeting. Do we have other comments from voting members of the committee or non-voting members of the committee before we move to public comment?
Yeah, this is Ignacio. So getting back to the chart that we were looking at, the improvement ideas. So is ESD already working on the ones that are low difficulty? And if so, can we get sort of a timeline on where they're at and how soon some of these will be done if they're not done already?
Yes, this is Norma. We can update as to some of the items that we are moving the needle on.
Thank you, Norma. Do we have other comments from committee members before moving to the public? Okay. One comment I did see from the public that I want to note here is Scott Dilly asking about making our presentations public and then emailing out these type of documents such as the one Sarah went through before the meeting. We do make these public after the fact. They are part of the minutes, so please know, and in particular, with regard to the minutes we approved for the last 3 meetings, those will be posted on our website, and we can discuss and see if there are any issues with mailing them out in advance of the next meeting, but we appreciate the suggestion, Scott. Thank you. Okay, so with that, if you would like to make a public comment, please state your name and spell it so we can capture it correctly for the minutes. Your comments are being recorded. However, if you would like your comments to be included in the meeting minutes, please submit them in writing via email to Tamara Johnson. And please limit your comments to 2 minutes. Do we have any public comments?
Hi, can folks hear me? Can folks hear me?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Okay, great. My name is Eilish, E-I-L-I-S-H, Villa, V-I-L-L-A. I'm an immigration attorney at Northwest Immigrants' Rights Project in Granger. I've been volunteering with the strikes over here in Yakima, and I'm going to try and make this really quick because you guys have only left us with 5 minutes for public comment. So basically, kind of just going over everything that was said. I would like to say, in the first place, something that I want to bring to y'all's attention is that employers over here, especially the employers of the 6 striking sites, aren't sending people home when they have symptoms of coronavirus crisis. I've heard this from several workers from the sites. So you guys need to know that, and I think somebody needs to be talking about holding these companies accountable because they aren't sending folks home. And we can't leave that responsibility to the workers because they're minimum wage earners and they're struggling to make a living. And so when they're feeling sick, of course they're going to go to work because they have to, because that's what they have to do to pay their bills. Another issue that's really prevalent over here is that employers are very resistant to provide any kind of PPE. I don't know if that's like a rule or how the law plays into that, but I just want to point that out. And then I would also like to say, since being in the community and being out a lot, I've seen so many vans full of what I think are H2A workers, full of them, right? Like a van with like, I don't know, 8 chairs or something in it, and none of the workers have masks on. So my organization saw that and is donating masks, when in reality, the state and the health agencies need to be paying for that. And then I also will attest to the lack of trust in the community over here, especially with the striking sites for labor and industries and ESD. Folks generally don't know how to navigate those systems, don't know who to get in touch with. Sometimes they don't know how to read and write. They don't understand the language that's on the forms. They don't have time to fill out the forms. And then once they do, they have an overall lack of sentiment or lack of trust that anything will be done. And from what we've seen, folks have filed different claims and demands, but nothing has really been done. There are 2 sites now that are going on more than 20 days of striking. And so I just wanted to kind of bring all of those to comment and have them be clear in your mind as you move forward, because these workers over here are being ignored and the agencies that are in power are not doing anything about it. So you all need to get to work and you need to start listening to the community.
Thank you. We appreciate those comments. I think we'll continue to go through public comments and then give members opportunity to respond to any comments if they wish. Do we have other comments from the public?
Yes. Hi, my name is Mari Lopez, and I am One America Yakima organizer. I had a question for you. How can the community get an updated list of contractors in Washington State, and which are the largest about the workers, H2A workers? And also another question is the numbers of H2A workers who have arrived. The numbers of H2A workers who have arrived, and where are they?
So this is Rosalinda. I think we got the number of the workers that have arrived. That was the 13,864 number that Norma gave us, Mary. But I think your question, I think it would be good to try to get an idea of where these workers are approximately. I mean, I know that's added detail, but I think Mary, that's a good question that she's asking. Also, the farm labor contractor list. Can we get that?
This is Norma. Just to follow up with your question, Mary and Rosalinda, please email me with your request.
So if the contractors are available online, L&I, farm labor contractor list of all licensed contractors.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Christina. Go ahead, from Christina. The Department of Labor and Industries. Hi, so the list is available online, but the list does not clarify which ones employ H2A and which ones do not. So that can be coordination with Norma, but I think Mike Gempler just highlighted that yeah, it's on the L&I website under farm labor contracting. And it's a PDF that's updated as needed.
But I think you made a good point that there's no way to tell which ones are actually bringing in H2A workers and which ones are not. So that's kind of it's a gap.
All right, so it sounds like we have a request for the ASWS office to see if we can break down the number of workers in the state by some geographical region and list out the contractors that employ H2A workers or bring in H2A workers.
Thank you, Dan. I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Do we have other comments from the public?
Yeah, this is Ryan Ogburn from Waffle. Just a real quick one. I know there was some questions early on in the meeting about how many transfer workers and how many more can Washington State expect for H2A workers. I think there's been a couple of transfers for Cherry Harvest, but the majority come in and transfer for Apple and Pear Harvest in August. So if the committee wanted to get really good numbers, I think a good time to follow up would be probably around the start of September. You'll know, a lot more information about how many transfers and how many workers are actually here, because that's kind of the last wave of when H2A workers come in, at least for, where WAFLA sees that. So just an idea.
Thank you, Ryan. It's helpful. Do we have other comments from the public?
Yes, it is Wendy Pantoja. And I would like to know about, so thank you for the presentation, was great. One thing about language, you was training, well, the people is training to make like write, but when you're working with people who speak different native language, sometimes it's not possible to translate by write. So my recommendation will be to have like some kind of radio spots or by record the people and to put in some web page, or to have like some strategy to bring that information to the people who speak different language. Like by example, in Pierce Conservation District in the Tacoma area, they have cultural navigators who are working really hard with that. And also, I would love to know about if it's some H2H work who is sick, which will be the following who the people will have, because what thinking about people who is scared to report. They have not, sometimes they have not a language. English is not a first language. It's in a different country, and the people is really scared. So we need to have that in consideration, like to be following, because the people can be sick and don't report because they are really scared. They're hiding information too. So thank you for inviting me to the meeting. And I second Michelle too.
Thank you for participating, Wendy. Thank you for participating, Wendy, and thank you for the comments. Do we have any other comments from the public?
Good morning, you guys.
Yeah.
My name is Christina Ortega, and I'm calling from Latino Community Fund. I wanted to touch base on what Rosalinda had mentioned earlier about some farm workers showing symptoms of COVID and still being in the workplace. I have been with workers since May 7th, specifically, that are on strike fighting, their labor laws and work environments regarding COVID. And what I am seeing and what I am hearing is exactly that there are workers in the workplace showing symptoms and could be symptomatic or have COVID, and they're being told that if they leave, they may lose their position in work or they may lose their job. So that is very much going on. And I haven't heard that from one or two workers. I've heard that from over 100 workers. So that is something that very much needs to be brought attention to, and we need to figure out how we're going to fix that and hold these warehouse owners accountable for that. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate those comments.
Thank you, Christina.
Do we have any further comments from the public?
Hi, yeah, I have a comment. Can you hear me?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Who is this?
This is Dulce Gutierrez with the Washington State Labor Council.
Thank you. Please feel free to go ahead and make your comments. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I just
I want to say first that I appreciate everybody's comments and the discussion that's been had. I want to say the State Labor Council has taken it upon ourselves to fill in the gap for many, many employers in the Yakima County who were not providing masks to their workers or who were selling masks to their workers on the work site. And I just wanted to let that be known because it's important that the community is recognized for the work that we did at our expense so that the employers could maintain their bottom line, even if it was at the expense of the workers. And moving forward, I'm grateful that the state is able to provide masks to these employers at the taxpayers' expenses to provide safety and PPE to the workers. Although I do think it's important that the regulations clarify if a face cloth or face mask is what the difference is in that terminology. As of recently, when the masks have been provided to the employers by the state, there now is complaints that employers are not taking into consideration the health limitations of folks with asthma or other respiratory problems. And so the masks that being provided to people are wonderful, but if there isn't any consideration for medical limitations for people, then it can also become another form of unsafe practice. In particular, the face shields that are plastic, these plastic materials are not friendly to the people's eyesight. So people are getting dizzy, or they simply just cannot keep that on their face for too long without feeling like they're suffocating. And so it's important that we're using science and recognizing, the human nature of what it is to wear face masks or face coverings. And I think there needs to be more clarity around that. And I think it's nobody's intention to allow workers to go from having zero protection to all of a sudden, they're wearing multiple layers of assumed protection, but in reality, it's not taking in consideration that folks also need to have the access to breathing. And so I don't know what kind of balance the state can be clarifying around that, but it surely needs to be clarified. Otherwise, employers can, without knowing, can be putting their workers in additional unsafe conditions, or in some cases, they're doing it to retaliate against workers who complained about not having masks in the first place. And so then that becomes, a retaliatory action by the employer that is dangerous, but also unlawful. And so if there could be some clarity around that, that could really give the employers a better idea on how to enforce the face covering regulations, but also it gives protection to the worker in many different ways. I also wanted to just comment lastly that I think that it's important that we also have some explanation or some clarity around how workers in the H-2A program or migrant workers who are in group shelters in cohorts of 15, how do they report things that are wrong? As it stands right now, in most cases, H-2A workers are very vulnerable in terms of being a captive labor force, but they also oftentimes are having their labor rights violated or their human rights violated, and no one knows about it until they have contact with the outside world, meaning they have contact with people at the grocery store, or they might have a relative in the city of Yakima, or somebody that they know that they've met at the work site that they've been able to talk to in terms of being able to talk to other coworkers. And so if these workers are isolated, which is what the group shelter model does to them, it completely isolates them more so than they've ever been in the past. How are we sure that they're going to have the knowledge to self-report as the state expects them to, or that they'll have any access to telling somebody else outside of their direct supervisor and employer when their labor rights or human rights are being violated? And I think it's really important that the state provides clarity around that Otherwise, I think that then the state is complicit. And that concludes my comment. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for your public comments. We appreciate them. Do we have other comments from the public?
Yeah, just real quick, Dan, this is Ryan again. Just for the numbers that you guys are trying to find out how many workers are in the state, I just want to clarify that you don't always have to file an H-2A application in a specific state to have work sites in that state. So if there are workers or employers that are in Oregon or Idaho that have work sites in Washington, those numbers wouldn't go to ESD. Those would go to the separate state workforce agencies, even though there are workers that could potentially be working in Washington state. So just wanted to make sure that's on your guys' radar if you're trying to find, specific numbers of H-2A workers in the state.
So this is
Thank you,
Rosalinda.
Ryan. We appreciate that suggestion.
How would ESD
Rosalinda.
find those numbers? For Dan and Norma.
I would say ESD would probably have to ask the Federal Department of Labor. Farm labor contractors especially have work sites in multiple states a lot of times, so that's an area you might want to focus on. If ESD knows there's a farm labor contractor in Washington, you could, ask them if they have work sites in other states, and so maybe that would give you a hint. But Federal DOL would have that information.
Thank you, Ryan. This is Norma. Keeping in mind, for example, I'm in an area where I'm only 30 minutes from the Oregon border, so we often have workers that live in either state but work in another state. So there are all kinds of numbers that we may not be able to manipulate or find.
I don't know how much time we've got left, but this is Rosalinda, and I just wanted to say that having community participate and bring in information is really important, especially with the difficulty in getting statistics and data and real numbers, like Norma was just explaining, that the best thing and the strongest that we've got going for us is actually our community speaking up and actually telling us what's really going on across the state. So I just want to thank everybody for participating and listening in on our meetings.
This is Mike Gempler. I have a few things to address. With regard to Dulcie's comment that people don't know how to report, in the new agriculture COVID requirements, which went into effect today, all employers are required to provide educational materials, including how to file a workplace complaint that makes clear the process for contacting LNI's Division of Occupational Safety and Health, including the phone number, and a statement that complaints can be made anonymously. So that's currently in the regulations that employers are to provide that. Additionally, there are so many things said that I feel are inaccurate, because I think people just aren't really up to date on what is going on, what the facts are. And so I believe it was Eilish who said that the state isn't doing anything and growers aren't doing anything with regards to providing protective equipment. And I've given out almost 40,000 of the masks provided by the state to growers, mailed them. They're coming in, picking them up. We've purchased a lot of masks that we're selling to growers because there weren't enough at the state level. And so there's a lot going on. There's a lot happening, and there's a lot happening quickly. And I'm really concerned about the allegations that people who are sick are staying in the workplace. Well, one part of the new regulations is that every day, and this is on the farm and in packing houses, the employer is to take the temperature of every employee every day and ask screening questions about symptoms. Every employee every day. And so, and there's also very little incentive. In fact, there's every incentive to, there's very little incentive for anybody to have somebody who has symptoms in the workplace. Nobody wants an outbreak. And so you don't want other people getting infected. And so I really think that anytime there is an allegation of an employer that who supposedly is telling people that they have to stay in the workplace even though they're sick, that's a very serious thing, and that needs to be reported immediately to L&I, Department of Health. Get on it, get your lawyers on it, whatever, because it's beyond me why somebody would do that. I mean, there's no incentive to do that whatsoever because they don't want to have an outbreak. You want to get people out of the workplace and into isolation as quickly as possible so people don't get sick. So I think, making generalized allegations and kind of, well, that's not helpful. Let's get specific and find out where the problems exist and get them investigated. But this screening is going on now every day. So that's it right now.
Well, we have specific names if you guys would like that now, just so that there's no doubt that these are just general allegations being thrown out that are not fact-based.
I really don't, I mean, you can give them to me, but I want you to give them to the agencies who have the regulatory authority and responsibility to investigate those allegations.
Well, we're doing both.
They can do something about it.
Yeah, we're doing both, Mike.
Well,
I just want to say too that Dulce is absolutely right. There were over 200 complaints filed, so these aren't just allegations. These are things that are actually happening.
Okay, well, that's what the system is, and that's how it's supposed to be used. If you have an allegation of that, make the complaint.
The system is supposed to be used so that when workers complain, something is being done about it. And I've brought that up earlier, saying that we don't believe it's functioning the way it should be functioning, and it continues to not function the way it's supposed to be. And I think that's what we keep bringing up is how is this going to be fixed? Because it isn't, and we have numerous complaints from workers that have gone in or want to, send them in and they get nowhere. So I think that's one of the reasons why we want to continue discussing how this is going, how these rules are going to be enforced. That's why Michelle brought it up and why we want to continue to have these discussions, because it is not working.
Well, I want this system to work, and I would like to see, say one complaint followed through all the way. The complaint was made to L&I, when it was made, whether it was followed up on. If it was not followed up, why not? What enforcement agent went to the work site, what the investigation was, if it happened, what the results of the investigation was. That's how this is supposed to work. So I'd like to see some follow through on why this system is allegedly failing, so we can do something about it.
It would be wonderful if you placed that on your agenda for the next meeting, and maybe you could go through an example.
Be fine by me. I'd like to see. I want to see the system work, and I think my members want to see this system work.
I mean, this is Mari again. I totally agree with Mike. I mean, I think that system is not working, but also who are the people that they need to reinforce this in every single workplaces? Because a lot of workers, they still complaining still that strike starting in Yakima. Other companies, because the strike, that's why we got a max. Most of the people, they were saying that. So they didn't have max for 2 months in a row. And just because the strikes, and now they're taking care of their employees. And also one thing that I have been talking with people who got COVID-19. And I believe that just to take the temperature is not enough. because it's different kind of symptom. I have been talking at least 10 people that they had COVID-19, and some people they're starting with a sore throat, really bad sore throat. Some people they're starting with their eyes, like a burning, something like that, but no temperature. So I think that the COVID-19 test needs to be mandatory in every single places, offering for free for employees, and not waiting till people they getting temperature. We need to find a way how to make it happen.
Mary, I just got done telling you that every employer is supposed to ask about all symptoms of every employee every day, in addition to taking their temperature. That's part of the regulation.
So that starts today. Starts today.
Correct.
There's already been several months. It's like I said before, this is late. Doesn't mean it's better late than never. We should still do it. So we need to see how this is going to work from now on. These rules that we still don't agree are strong enough. Even that, how is the industry going to implement it so it actually implement these new rules so that it actually does protect workers?
Okay.
This is Dan with ESD. Thank you, Mike, for your comments. Thank you, Rosalinda, for your comments. Thank you, public, for your comments. We'll move back to any public comments that have not, to people in the public who have not yet had the opportunity to comment. First, is there anybody other than Mike and Rosalinda that wants to make a comment of the voting members of the committee?
Dan, it's Rosella
Yes.
Mosby. I would like to make a quick comment,
Go ahead.
please.
Go ahead.
As a voting member of this committee and as an employer who signs my name on the dotted line and is thankful to sign paychecks for a wonderful crew that is working as a team to accomplish our goals this season. We have been taking temperatures for a while and we ask symptomatic questions. I just want to reiterate that there is nothing to be gained for anybody, farm workers or employers, if we are not acting collectively to get through this just unprecedented season. And so I agree with Mike. There's points that I agree where everybody has points that everybody's made that I'm in agreement. But we're not the only industry in existence. There are other industries who are also dealing with similar issues and challenges. And when this all started, PPE was very, very difficult to come by. It was all headed to the medical industry and not exactly towards agriculture. And so there are groups who have made tremendous strides to get PPE to farm workers. It is becoming more available to agriculture as a whole within the state. And we're super thankful for that. We are doing, I truly believe, agriculture as a whole. I see it within our crew and within our fellow farmers. I'm in South King County and in Pierce County. We farm in both, where we are collectively working together to try to figure out how to solve issues and keep everybody safe. So while, yes, there are bad apples, I really want to acknowledge the fact that there are people who are working hard to get through this whole season with the least amount of impact, because we are not successful if we don't all work together. And so frustrating as some of these comments are to hear today, as a whole, I'm hoping we can get back to the agenda that we have set as a committee. We do have a deadline we need to recognize, and goals that we are supposed to check off too. So with that being said, that's all I have.
Thank you, Rosella. I appreciate those comments. I see in the comment an opinion, a couple points made in the comment section. One is a suggestion that we take the comments in the conversation bar and capture those and make them part of the public record. Tamara, we should do that. And two is about having a place where comments can be emailed. Again, comments can also be sent to Tamara at tjohnson, tjohnson@esd.wa.gov. Is there any member of the public who has not yet spoken who would like to make a comment for the record?
Yes, my name is Oscar Zambrano. I'm the Director of Policy for Progreso, and we're a statewide organization supporting Latino issues across the state. And sorry, I'm a little, I guess, flustered because, you know, the public has to wait 3 hours to make comments, and I feel like some of the committee members, you know, like right now, just took up more time of public comment when, you know, they can have these conversations during the committee meeting. With that said, I do want to acknowledge and just mention a name, and the person is David Cruz. David Cruz is a warehouse worker from Allen Brothers that passed away recently due to complications of COVID-19. I want you all to remember that name because that's the reason why we are in this call and why the community and agriculture workers are upset. The system is broken, we know. I know that it's not a perfect system, and I know that, you know, a lot of the comments here have been mentioned that it's labor intensive, resources intensive, but I think the reason why we're advocating for these changes, and I agree a lot with Rosalinda, is because the preservation of human life. You know, I heard that there is no incentive for some of these growers or owners to bring people to work that are COVID, and the incentive, the bottom line is you know, is a profit. Many times I've also been in the fields and working with the warehouse workers where we've heard from them, you know, and unless you want to call them liars, that the employers have told them, you know, that they have to show up to work, or they will lose their jobs, or that, you know, they will get deduct points that will go against their records. And, you know, if you want to look for a job somewhere else, that record sometimes follows you. So I think that at the end, even though not employers, because I recognize that there's some employers that have done a good job of responding to COVID-19, and there are a few bad apples. And the thing is that, you know, we are advocating here to make sure that those bad apples get proper correction through this committee and, if possible, legislation. At the end of the day, you know, we're here because human life is more important than profit. Human life, no matter if you're the owner or if you're the employee on the lines or you're picking the apples, that life matters. You know, that person matters. And the thing is that if we don't start focusing and centering people that actually, you know, make sure that the apples are taken care of, and the people that are actually in the fields and in the weather, doesn't matter. You know, in last fire season, we saw those people out there in the middle of the smog, and as we get ready for more fires this season, are we also getting ready for more PPE that they're going to need, or are we taking precautions right now to make sure that those people are not put in harm's way? And so I think with that, you know, we shouldn't need legislation if people and then the associations that are the growers and the other groups that are here actually would come together and say, you know what, we're going to center human life. We're going to center these employees, because they're the ones actually making the money for us. And I know some of you signed checks, you know, but you wouldn't sign a check if you didn't have anybody picking your fruit or packing it for you. So all I got to say is that, you know, we're here to advocate for human life, to be over the profit, and to make sure that no matter what regulations we advocate for, remember that we're centering people like David Cruz that passed away. We're trying to prevent more people from having these secondary conditions, or, you know, having COVID-19, you know, complications. And not just COVID-19, but we have the wildfires coming. We have other issues coming. We have pesticides. So at the end, it's not because we are against the industry or we want to make sure that the more regulations. It's because we want to preserve the human life that makes this industry and this economy go. So I want to just remember that we're here because of David Cruz. We're here because of people that don't have voices, and we're here because people don't have associations, don't have unions that represent them. And so we're here as one of the frontiers that people can actually, you know, know that we're advocating for them. And at the end of the day, we want to preserve life. We want to make sure that people are safe. We want to make sure that we know what's happening in our communities. And at the same time that, as we continue these policies and these issues that the community is dealing with, that we're centering those people and the fact that human life is much more important than any other, policy when it comes down to the industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. We appreciate those comments. Do we have any other comments from the public by any individuals who have not yet been given an opportunity to speak?
Yes, hello, this is Giovanni Severino, community member of Yakima. So definitely want to ditto everything that Oscar said and kind of go a little bit more with the unfortunate thing that happened with David Cruz. Let's not forget that this person has family who potentially might have been exposed to COVID-19, and let's step away from thinking of him as just as an employee, but as a community member who might have his family might have been exposed, and if David Cruz had family members that were out even not knowing that he was infected, but got the virus transmitted to him, and then that person went out to the community, then that person transmitted it to someone else, and so on and so on. So he was a community member, and as a community we felt them, and we're here to speak to this body to make sure that we continue working as a community to make sure that all of us are protected. And this is a community spread virus, and if we don't focus our resources on this group of this industry, it's going to affect the other industries. And you're right, there are other industries that we should focus on as well. But we've noticed that this industry has been heavily impacted. These community members, not just employees, but community members of ours, are getting impacted at higher rates. And like I said, it spreads quickly, and eventually it'll spread to the other folks that work in other industries as well. So if we know that this is, becoming a sort of epicenter, or not epicenter, but there's a high population of folks that are being exposed to COVID-19 in these industries, well, let's focus on looking at ways that we can prevent the spread, listen to the actual people who are in the front lines, who are there, who are the ones getting infected. People don't just talk just to talk. We're speaking out based off of the experiences that we are seeing and are experiencing. And, to come to one of these meetings online, away from my work, just to speak out for my community, I will always do it, but it shows that it's not just because I want to speak out of nowhere. Like, there's meaning behind this, and we're pleading, please take some sort of action. If the system isn't working, that's why we're here, to make sure that we have other folks, other legislative bodies, other groups to support and do something about it. So I hope something comes out of this. Hope we have a clear, more and longer conversation about it, hopefully in the upcoming meeting, and I plan on participating in that meeting as well. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Do we have any other public comments?
No, this is Mari. Just to do a quick recommendation about all these questions. I would like to see it in the next meeting and what action we're going to take on it. Because in the past meetings, a lot of things they were on the, we were talking in the meeting, for example, housing, a lot of things, but it's not, we don't doing a follow up on that. And right now we have really great questions from the community. So I would like to address it in the next agenda and what action we want to take together on this.
Thank you. Do we have any further comments from the public? Do we have any further comments from members of the committee?
Dan, this is Rosalinda again. I know I've been speaking a lot in these meetings, and I think it's necessary. But I did want to say that when this has been a common process for when farm workers speak about the reality of what's happening in our communities, there is very strong push back on what farm workers say and what we say. And so I really appreciate the comments that the community brings. I think that participation is peaking because of the danger to our communities. And I just want to say, as a committee member of this committee, I sit here to try to represent the issues of what's happening on the ground, in the fields, and in the packing sheds and everywhere in our communities, as does Ramon Torres. And we sit trying to represent and bring to you all what we are seeing. We believe the workers, we always do. And the pushback that we get for bringing the truth to these tables is difficult to bear sometimes. And I just want to say that we were always hoping that in this committee we would create the space where we could have those discussions and try to fix the problems. And when we say it isn't working, it's because the workers are telling us it isn't working. When something isn't working, it isn't working. And we want to fix it. So thank you for everybody for participating. And I think, hoping that next time when community members make a comment, I pledge to listen and then bring it back into the committee process in the best way possible, and not to shut down or openly oppose or debate. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rosalinda. Appreciate those comments. Do we have any other thoughts or comments from committee members? Okay, hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Stay safe, everybody.
Goodbye.
Thank you.